We're going to be discussing the comrade George Lester Jackson, his ideas, his legacy, and the continued relevance of his teachings to New African revolutionary nationalism, both its theory and application. Comrade George Lester Jackson was born on September 23rd, 1941 in Chicago. His parents, Lester and Georgia Jackson, had 5 other children besides George, including Jonathan and his little sister Penny. They moved to California in the 1950s, and the stark poverty and repression George felt as a youth led him to run-ins with the pigs early in his life. He was committed as a youth to California's youth juvenile prison system called Youth Authority, where he spent some time in the YA facility, Paso Robles. If anybody ever been to CYA, they know how brutal and sadistic Paso was. Understand they were imprisoning children. In 1961, at 18 years old, George was in the car with one of his homies. You knew this cat from YA. They stopped at a gas station. Unbeknownst to George, because George stayed in the car, his homie went and stuck up the gas station and got $70 from the gas station attendant. Only a block away, the car was pulled over, and both of them were summarily arrested and promptly railroaded. And George was sentenced to 1 year to life in prison. George, in his first years in the penitentiary, was not political. And you need to understand one of the primary reasons that George articulated for his own political awakening was the example that was laid for him by the Black guerrillas of seeking to transform the New African criminal mentality into a New African revolutionary mentality. He had formed a group called the Wolf Pack. And even though they was, primarily military, they wasn't that political at the time. The environment, both inside and out that period in history, was no longer conducive to the humdrum existence of petty prison pressures or the sidewalk escapism of the oppressed and disenfranchised communities in New African America. These things started to be pushed to the background as the articulation of our social conditions, and the ultimate solution to it, revolution, was being embraced by non-European people and poor people of European descent around the world, from Vietnam to Ireland to Cuba, from El Salvador to the streets of Oakland, California. And George was no exception. In 1966, George met the leader of the revolutionary transformation of the lumpen class in America, W.L. Nolan, at San Quentin State Prison. W.L. introduced George to the ball and chain of revolutionary theory. He called it the ball and chain because the ball represented 360 degrees of revolutionary knowledge at the time. The chain was the 5 links that bound that knowledge together, which at the time was Marx, Lenin, Mao, Trotsky, and Fanon. George studied intently. He absorbed this knowledge almost intuitively as he sought to express his own social reality. They studied the Mau Mau. They studied revolutionary struggles across the world. And each one was a new opportunity to gain greater insight into our own contradictions here in the U.S., while always keeping the development of our ideology firmly rooted in our own historical experience in America. George restructured the Wolf Pack and renamed it into the Black Family as a companion organization to the W.L. Nolan's Black Guerrillas, who were George's mentors at the time. And I mean, not just W.L. You had Alvin Miller, you had Bill Christmas, you had Big Jake Lewis, James McClain, you had Big Giggs, Kalamumba, and many others. It was a time and period in history where the Black guerrillas, by and far, were the most advanced political formation in the California prison system. They orientated and indoctrinated George and those comrades who was with George into the equalitarian freedom fighters that the Black family became in the science of revolution and scientific socialism. George took to it like a fish to water. His political analysis and social practice emerged to rise to a level equal to WL. Both the political and military organizing George and WL were so resonant with both the prison population on the inside, and I mean even some whites and Mexicans, and the broader society on the outside, that repeated attempts on their lives were made, and repeated counterattacks solidly would be no easy feat. Every time a New African was attacked from that point forward, there was a corresponding counterattack. So it was no more that blacks living on their knees and being subjected to the type of oppression, both inside or outside, because cats just wasn't accepting it no more. And George and WL was two of the primary catalysts for that new awakening of practical confidence amongst the black lumpen proletariat. In January 1969, because these cats were so effective in San Quentin, pigs moved George and W.L. Nolan to Soledad. All right. In 1970, just a few months later, they opened a new exercise yard in Soledad, Owen, an integrated yard. And you have to understand something at the time. The reason the yards were segregated is because of the degree of racism and violence that was perpetuated against black prisoners at the time. But they created a new yard, they integrated. This yard you would have Euro-Americans, which were mostly members of the Aryan Brotherhood, Mexicans, who was mostly members of the Mexican Mafia at the time, and New African prisoners, the vast majority of which were black guerrillas. Some members of the black family. You had some black Muslims, but the vast majority of them were black guerrillas at the time. They let them all out to the yard simultaneously. It was an obvious setup. Comrades knew it was set up from the get. W.L. Nolan and some other black guerrilla comrades, such as Alvin Big Jug Miller and Cleveland Edwards, went to the yard, regardless of this fact. Of course, the AB's Mexican Mafia attacked them. And when the comrades started dropping them cats in self-defense, it was a pig in the tower named O.B.P. Miller. He opened fire on the comrade. He hit W.L., hit Cleveland Edwards, and hit Alvin Miller. The wounds that they sustained, they possibly, had they got medical attention, maybe could have survived. But the pigs let them bleed out on the yard. This assassination was the catalyst for the national wave of progressive resistance that would come to be known as the prison movement. Now, in another part of the prison, particularly sadistic cop in Wild Wing by the name of John Mills was found dead only days after WL and the other comrades were assassinated. He had been beaten and thrown over the top tier. In January of 1970, George, John Clichette, and Flea Drumgo were accused and charged with the murder of John Mills. This was a capital offense at the time. It was known as the Soledad Brothers case. In contrast to the cop O.B.P. Miller that murdered those brothers in Soledad, he was not charged at all. Grand jury announced, as they always did at the time, that it was a justifiable homicide. Shortly thereafter, Manchild, another black guerrilla by the name of Jonathan Jackson, George's younger brother, stormed Marin County Courthouse and sought to free the comrades Bill Christmas, John Clichette. Now, a lot of people assume that the other comrade was also a predetermined member of that, and that simply was not the case. When that particular contradiction occurred, Rochelle McGee was just one of the cats that happened to be in the back of the holding cells back there with some other prisoners. And when Jonathan came in that courtroom and said, the guerrillas is taking this over, and released John Clichette and Bill Christmas. I mean, James McClain and Bill Christmas. They went to the back and asked who wanted to lead. The only person that volunteered was Rochelle McGee. So they took the judge, a couple of jurors, and the DA, and began to exit the courthouse. Unbeknownst to them, agent provocateur by the name of Louis Tackwood had already informed the Los Angeles intelligence unit that this was going to occur. You had members of both the Los Angeles SWAT team, Marin County Police Department, Marin County Sheriff, California Department of Corrections, and the city of Marin's Police Department outside waiting on them. Now, there's another aspect of this tale, but that's not important to this particular discussion at the time. They opened fire on them as they sought to leave that parking lot in that van. Everybody was killed but Rochelle McGee and two of the jurors by that hail of bullets from police. This impacted George profoundly. The martyrdom of his brother. And George didn't see it as a failed attempt. He saw it as resistance that actually brought forth the unfortunate early death of his brother. In 1971, on August 21st, while George was leaving attorney visit with a cat named Stephen Bingham, this CO dude named Rubiaco, CO Rubiaco, asked George what he had in his hair. And George immediately produced a firearm and took over the adjustment center. Forced this dude to release some other comrades, and they quickly took control of the adjustment center. The primary reason for this was they were seeking to assassinate George. They had made at least 16 attempts on his life while he was in the adjustment center of San Quentin after they moved him from Soledad during the Soledad brothers case. We got some other comrades with him, Hugo Pinal, Johnny Spain. Got some other comrades with him. But when the pigs started firing down the hallway into AC with a 45 Thompson machine gun, they was indiscriminately shooting, and George knew if he didn't at least sacrifice himself, that he was gonna kill all his comrades. So what George did was he used one of the keys to open the door out to the yard. That yard led to nowhere. There was a 25-foot wall with a gun tower perched on top, and that's what George ran toward. And they killed him. Now, George initially told all the comrades to stay here, but Johnny Spain that was his brother. He just couldn't see his comrade making that type of sacrifice without him at least trying to help. And so Johnny Spain ran out there with George. He was shot as well, but did die. George has left behind a legacy of revolutionary theory, analysis, tactics, and even a strategic approach, which is still relevant and resonant today. So, who was George? George was one of the most dynamic revolutionaries to be produced from the New African underclass in America. He understood the single most revolutionary class of people in the United States of America, the class of people who has the least interest in the continued social relationship between capitalism and the rest of the people is the New African underclass in America or black people. This is not to say that George's position was that this is the only people in which revolutionary potential exists, because that's not true. That wasn't his position. But it was his position that black communes would be the most advanced segment in terms of revolutionary potential, not necessarily revolutionary actuality, which is the reason why he stressed the fact that the primary motive force for much of the organizing that they did was to transform the New African criminal mentality into a New African revolutionary mentality. And George gave us an assessment on the nature and structure of U.S. society, which was so salient, so accurate, so advanced at the time, that is still accurate today. The United States is the most advanced fascist state in the history of human civilization. And when I say that, you have to understand what fascism is. Vast majority of people hear that term, they automatically think of Germany under Hitler, or Indonesia under Suharto, Argentina under Pinochet, or Italy under Mussolini. And yes, that's fascism, but that's what we call rudimentary fascism, or primitive fascism, or overt fascism, not advanced fascism. Advanced fascism, if I was going to use a single term and borrow it from the comrade George, it would be reform. So what do you mean by this? What do you mean by fascism as reform? George argued that fascism is not something that happens to us. He argued that fascism is something that's supported by the people. It's a mass psychology. It's ideology. Support for the U.S. government, and it's not support for a government, because the United States is not a government, it's an empire. And George articulated this in clear terms. If you look at his analysis in Blood Mine, when he spoke about the concept of goals of revolution, one of the primary aspirations of revolution, as George saw it, was the complete and utter removal, the destruction, the replacement of fascist mass psychology with a mass psychology which prompted the people to, one, work together, and two, to do so with the motive force to liberate themselves. What do we mean by liberation? When we speak of liberation, we speak of independence. When we speak of independence, we speak of revolutionary scientific socialism. But understand something. George also understood that these people ain't just going to let you conquer their country. Revolution is illegal. It's outlawed. It's a crime. And it's one of the reasons why he articulated that it would be the outlaw, the lumpen, that would be the vanguard of the revolution in this country. People and the workers would adopt it. Prisons are not institutionalized on such a mass scale by the people. Most people realize that crime is simply the result of a grossly disproportionate distribution of wealth, privilege, a reflection of the present state of property relations. That's what George said. He stated we must educate the people in the real causes of economic crimes. They must be made to realize that even crimes of passion are the psychosocial effects of an economic order that was decadent 100 years ago. All crime can be traced to objective socioeconomic conditions, socially productive or counterproductive activity. In all cases, it is determined by the economic system, the method of economic organization. Now, a lot of people would take that passage from George and read it as though George is speaking of mechanistic socialism or a mechanistic analysis, which only takes into account objective economic factors. Nothing to be further from the truth. George understood the psychological, the cultural aspect of revolutionary transformation. Its necessity in the forefront of any revolutionary scheme. This is what George said as it relates to strategies, as it relates to transforming the nature and structure of U.S. society. George's strategy began with organizing the people through survival programs. He spoke about the Black commune and its centrality to any revolutionary scheme in the United States of America. He made us acutely aware, and I quote, "We are not contending with fools who will allow us to simply walk in and organize people to war against them. All serious challenges will be met with panic and repression." This is the primary reason why, if you seek to build institutions in your community, which will ultimately delink the people from the processes of their oppression that is represented by the current state and the current social order, the moment they notice what you're doing, you're going to be attacked. And if you have not pre-organized, if you have not pre-rationalized the necessity of a self-defense component, you will go the way as every other comrade before you. Maybe in a concentration camp or dead. I don't say this, as some armchair revolutionary. I speak of this from practical experience as one who has spent 31 years in prison and 20 of that in solitary confinement solely based on my political ideas and activism. One of the reasons why, even though George and comrades ultimately merged both the Black family and the Black guerrillas, this occurred in 1970. And George was not particularly involved with the process because George was in the hole. But when that merger occurred and George accepted the honorary role as field marshal for the Black Panther Party, he did it for one primary reason. The primary reason he did it was to show the interconnection between the inside and the outside. Prison is a socially hostile microcosm of its outside production. Meaning, if you want to know what's going on in society and you find yourself in the concentration camp environment, all you need to do is go look at the yard. The exact same contradictions, the exact same social relations, which exist between peoples, between the productive system, between authoritarians and the people, exist in the prison environment, except they exist without the veneer, the false veneer of patriotism and unity. You know full well you are oppressed in the prison setting. Contradictions are stark. In society, they have allowed what's called the marketplace. They have allowed the consumer counterculture to imbue the people with the illusion that somehow you got freedom and dignity, that somehow you have choice, when the furthest thing from the truth could be accurate. You actually have no choice in the totalitarian society, because whether you choose right or left, both choices was placed there by your oppressor. No matter which choice you choose, other than delinking from the system itself, serves to empower, reinforce, and reproduce the ideology of the ruling class in your own mind. And to do so in such a way that you don't understand that's what's happening. George said, "I'm convinced that any serious organizing of people must carry with it from the start a potential threat of revolutionary violence. Without it, the establishment's forces will succeed in isolating the political organizer and closing down his projects before the people can feel their benefits. To protect the lives An average, everyday man and woman engaging in the processes of their liberation must do so with the understanding at any time they could be called a terrorist, a criminal, an outlaw, uh, an enemy of the people, an enemy of the state, and treated as such by your government. The oppressed often choose to hide behind the smiles and acquiescence rather than face the even more brutal treatment the system inflicts upon those who choose to rebel, George said. But there are always some who say, don't just stand there. If we stick together and fight, we can win. We don't have to put up with this shit anymore. Momentarily, these militants touch the deep longing for freedom inside the people and begin to win support. But then the system moves in and hauls them away to prison or brutally ends their lives. At this critical stage, the movement will either retaliate against the government or disintegrate. The revolution, first and foremost, is about community, support, solidarity, people sticking together. If a group does nothing when the people are being beaten and jailed and murdered, the people may still mouth a few tokens of right on, but will probably say, I'm not putting my life in the hands of these people. They're just not serious. Bad as it is, I'll take my chances with the system. Over the course of the last 30 years of my life, perhaps the most salient truth that I've learned from 30 years of seeking to organize in our communities is this fact. If you cannot provide a viable alternative to the economic processes, the social processes, the cultural processes of the enemy state, the same processes which oppress the people, but yet and still they're familiar with, the people will abandon you and embrace their own oppression. Rather than resist, organize to counter it. If we are to be successful in transforming the nature and structure of both our people and our communities, it has to begin with changing their conditions, altering the day-to-day conditions upon which our people live and survive. If you're serious about revolution, if you're not just, paying lip service to it, you would have to concede that the comrades' analysis as it relates to that point is not simply accurate, is indisputable. And your practice, what you do, should follow that. Truth only has one criteria, and that's practice. It's the one criterion of truth. And if you assert that you are a revolutionary, and you mean that, you must also understand that requires a requisite and consummate commitment of total, absolute dedication to the realization of the objectives of the revolution, as well as the consequences that come with it. Comrade said, after revolution has failed, and I lived through this, I'm on the other end of it right now. We all are trying to rebuild what was destroyed. All questions must center on how a new revolutionary consciousness can be mobilized around the new set of class antagonisms that have been created by the authoritarian reign of terror. At which level of social, political, and economic life should we begin our new attack? First, we, the Black partisans, and their vanguard party, the old and new left alike, must concede that the workers' revolution and its vanguard parties have failed to deliver the promises, the changes in prosperity, in property relations, or any of the institutions that support them. This must be conceded without bitterness, name-calling, or the intense rancor that is presently building. I'm going to stop right there. What the comrade is saying is, During the Black Liberation Movement, when we had an opportunity, there was a degree of revolutionary potential in the United States that actually could have, along with the global struggle for revolutionary anti-capitalist change occurring globally, we could have changed this world, but we didn't. We were unprepared for the counterintelligence program. We had made only a rudimentary, only certain segments of us, let me say this, let me put this a different way. Only certain segments of us began to understand the need for a intelligence and counterintelligence apparatus. And by the time those of us who did understand began to restructure and reform our organizations to align with these new realities that weren't new, we just weren't aware of them. The Black Panther Party was destroyed. The Black Liberation Army was driven underground. The vast majority of the Central Community, the Black guerrilla family, was in prison. Many of our cadres had been either killed or captured, and the few that were left were driven underground. And fascists just kept on trotting right along. They erected a new prison industrial slave complex, which boasts $244 billion a year off the backs and blood of poor people that they hunt, capture, imprison. And they replaced the revolutionary culture that we sought to form in our communities with gang banging and slang. Cats killing each other with which way they hat turned, to which way they pants is sagging, or what color rag they got hanging out their pocket, or who's serving on their corner, or other contrapositive bullshit. That replaced the culture of resistance and the desire for independence that previously imbued our people. Understanding that and accepting that as the truth, it frees you to make a critical analysis of our current condition, how to move out of this current condition. George said, the significance of the new fascist arrangement lies in the fact that the business as usual concept is accompanied by concessions to the degenerate segment of the working class, with the aim of creating a buffer zone between the ruling class and the still potentially revolutionary segments of the lower class. So what they did was they allowed us to be rappers and basketball players and football players and Oprah Winfrey's and Bob Johnson. I'm gonna dangle these few cats in front of your face and let you too believe that that could be you. And if you collaborate strongly enough, if you can provide a significant enough economic return on an investment, of course, that could be your actuality. But I want you to look at those personages, those people that I just spoke about. I want you to keep this in mind. That's not by chance or happenstance that they have the current socioeconomic standing that they do. It's not by chance or happenstance that they have the current national renown that they do. Think about this. I'm gonna give you a picture. Let's say you got a room, and in that room, it's 100 New Africans, and it's one door. Now, above that room is a gateway. At the top, it's a gun rail, and you got 4 cats sitting on that gun rail with machine guns. They just start shooting in the crowd. There's only one way out this room. So everybody is hustling and busting and trying to get through that door. They want to be that one person to get out. And lo and behold, 3 or 4 do get out. 3 or 4 people do get out before so many dead bodies stacked up in front of the door, can't nobody else escape. When those 3 or 4 people get out that room, what's on the other side is riches and wealth and fame and renown. And they embrace that riches, wealth, fame, and renown. But what Cameras on the other side of that door don't show you is that room is full of dead corpses. People who didn't make it through that door. That is analogous with the social relationship that the New African Collective in America has with the United States. Of course, they don't throw us a bomb. It allows you to believe that you too could be that person. And so you accept the usurpations of your rights. You accept people producing your history to critical race theory. You accept the police brutality. You accept the poverty. You accept the underdevelopment. You accept the undereducation. You accept it while it's acceptable. George said, corporative ideals have reached their logical conclusion in the United States. The new corporate state has fought its way through crisis after crisis, established its ruling elites in every important institution, formed its partnership with labor through these elites, erected the most massive network of protective agencies replete with spies, technical and animal, to be found in any police state in the world. The violence of the ruling class of this country in the long process of its trend toward authoritarianism and its last and highest state, fascism, cannot be rivaled in its excesses by any other nation on earth today or in history. When we look upon the contradictions that we face on a day-to-day basis to pay the rent, to keep the lights on, to get your kids a nice pair of shoes so they can go to school with their feet warm when it's cold. And we find ourselves struggling to do these things, so we have to sacrifice eating ourselves. I know sisters that sacrifice meals throughout the week to ensure that their children got anything they want to eat. And they shouldn't have to. It's enough food on this planet where don't nobody got to be hungry. It's enough knowledge on this planet where no one has to be uneducated. It's enough housing on this planet where no one has to be homeless. There's enough work to be done on this planet where nobody has to be unemployed. The nature and structure of the socioeconomic arrangement, the cultural arrangement in fascist America exists because you have a relatively small number of elites who greed. They just, no other way I can put this. They're willing to kill us all to maintain their lifestyle of opulence and excess. They do so through the extraction of the surplus value of your labor. And they'll continue to do so as long as you let them. George understood this reality. He understood it intimately. George said fascism has temporarily succeeded under the guise of reform. The only way we can destroy it is to refuse to compromise with the enemy state and its ruling class. Compromises were made in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. The old vanguard parties made gross strategic and tactical errors. At the existential moment, the last revelation about oneself, not many members of the old vanguard choose to risk their whole future, their lives, in order to alter those conditions we call destructive to life. They allow reformism. Reform is death to revolution. I'm going to say this again so everybody understands what fascism is. Fascism is reform. I'm gonna give you an example of reform. And the example I'm gonna give is graphic. It may offend some people. I just don't give a fuck. I don't care if it offends you or not. If you had a dude, some big grizzly cat, raping some person, and he sodomized, fucking them in the ass, and they screaming for help, and this dude pulls his penis out and spreads a little lube on it and goes right back to work. That's reform. All he did was made the rape a little bit more comfortable with a little lube. He didn't stop raping them. He kept right on doing it. That's reform. Revolution is when you kill that son of a bitch. where he can't rape another person again in his life. That's revolution. You ain't got no dick in your ass at all. Lubed or not. That's revolution. The vast majority of people, not merely New African people, but all people, accept reform. They accept reform as enough. Okay, I can live in poverty so long as it ain't so bad that I starve to death. That's enough. I can live hand them check to check so long as it ain't so bad that I get evicted this month. That's enough. It ain't so bad to where I can't look out for my children when I know full well they need help because I got a fixed income and my social security check barely cover my own bills. That's enough. That's reform. George was clear on his position as it relates to reform. You cannot compromise. But on the flip side of the same coin, there must be an alternative. There has to be something other than this way of life. We are faced with the task of raising a positive mobilization of revolutionary consciousness in a mass of people that has gone through a contra-positive authoritarian process. The new vanguard elements seem to agree that withdrawal from the enemy state and its social, political, and economic life is the first step towards its destruction. The new vanguard elements seem to agree that the new revolutionary consciousness will develop in the struggles of withdrawal. We developed a blueprint for withdrawal that we call the Autonomous Infrastructure Mission. It is building an infrastructure that is wholly and completely independent of the state. It's one that relies on us working together. It's the only way any of the initiatives are functioning. That was not by chance or happenstance. When these were designed while I was in the SHU, when we was first designing these concepts, and I was drafting this stuff out on paper, and me and comrades was debating, and hours and hours of research went into what currently worked and what didn't work. And these basic initiatives, the Sustainable Agricultural Commune, the Closed Circuit Economic Initiative, U Community Action Program, New African Math and Science Center Initiative, Community Safe Zone Initiative, Secure Communities Mandate, Emergency Response Network, when all these things were initially drafted, they were drafted with a single purpose. That single purpose was to create, to make revolution. You cannot effectively transform the nature and structure of a society as so thoroughly immersed and dependent upon the fascist order as the United States of America if you don't give a viable, life-sustaining alternative to the people. One that they could see, taste, touch, and feel on a day-to-day basis. George asks the question as it relates to that point. Just how many Americans are willing to accept the physical destruction of some parts of their fatherland so that the rest of the land and the rest of the world might survive in good health? How can the Black industrial worker be induced to carry out a valid workers' revolutionary policy? What and who will guide him? That's a valid question. Those of y'all that's listening to me right now, I want you to think about your brother, your homeboys and your homegirls, your sister, your mom and dad, the homegirl that live next door, your neighbor, people that you kick it with at your job every day. You think that they will be willing to end the processes that provide them their check today if they were ensured that they would control the processes that provide the basis of their prosperity tomorrow? Who do you think would follow a program that would end the current social order? I'm willing to suggest that the vast majority of the people wouldn't do that. They would, in fact, probably side with their oppressor. And that's just the unfortunate reality. So it can't be overtly expressed in those terms. It has to be taught in practical terms. George answered that question that I just asked, that I just quoted from him. He answered that question. He said the commune, the central citywide revolutionary culture. But who will build the commune that will guide the people into a significant challenge to property rights? It will involve building a political, social, and economic infrastructure capable of filling the vacuum that has been left by the establishment ruling class and pushing the occupying forces of the enemy culture from our midst. A lot of people interpret that literally, as though there's going to be this grand military engagement between the people and the forces of the U.S. government. That's not how that's going to happen. Currently, if we're being absolutely objectively true, we do not possess currently the military power to repel the full might of the U.S. military industrial complex. We just don't. This is not to say we shouldn't be producing the means for our self-defense, because what that does mean is just that. The fact that that is the current state upon which we exist in our communities, while a Dylan S. Ruff could walk into a church and just, murder 9 people and walk out and go have a hamburger, is part and parcel to that point. The implementation of this new social, political, and economic program will feed and comfort all the people on at least a subsistent level and force the owners of the enemy bourgeois culture either to tie their whole fortunes to the communes and the people or to leave the land, the tools, and the market behind. If they will not leave voluntarily, we will expel. But George asks again, who will build on an ideal that begins with force? Now, I'm going to stop right there. So I want to make something clear to y'all. If you are currently a member of the George Jackson Grassroots Collective, Autonomous Infrastructure Mission, Revolutionary Forces of the People's Republic of New Africa, if you are aligned with any progressive formation, now or in the future, at some juncture, you are going to encounter resistance to your organized. The system is not going to allow you to create mechanisms by which its citizenry, its power, can be disconnected from the processes that they control and create new processes which are independent of that control. They will resist that. They will do so in a systematic and organized form. We found that out the hard way during the counterintelligence program. My talking to you right now is proof positive of that point. It's imperative that we understand self-defense, armed struggle, and decolonization are the exact same processes. They will have to begin with the building of our own ability to feed ourselves, house ourselves, clothe ourselves, develop technology for ourselves, educate ourselves, employ ourselves, and enrich ourselves. It will begin with self-determination. It will end with self-defense. This will be the order of revolution in the modern sector, in the modern time. In blacks, the authoritarian traits are mainly the effects of terrorism and lack of intellectual stimulation, George said. The communal experience will redeem them. At present, the black worker is simply choosing the less dangerous and less complicated strategy of survival. All classes and all people are subject to the authoritarian syndrome. It is an atavistic throwback to the herd instinct, but it requires only the proper trauma, the proper eco-sociological set of circumstantial pressures to bring forth a genuine revolutionary consciousness. What George meant was those brothers and sisters that's in the hood right now slanging and banging, they can be redeemed. But it's going to have to be through a revolutionary process by which they confront it with their own contradictions. Well, they have no choice but to change. The way you do that is you provide alternatives to the current establishment of social life by encouraging the people that they love to embrace the survival programs that are in. That's how you do it. You change the circumstances of their environment. You demonstrate in concrete terms that there's an alternative to their current way of life. In so doing, they're going to protect that which they love. That process of defense itself will change their view of social life and the way they relate to it. George understood this. This is the reason why he constantly stressed revolution is a war for the minds of the masses. We're not seeking simply to establish a new way of life or a new nation state. We are seeking to establish a new core psychology, one which is not relying on greed, hate, division, one that's not relying on fascism. There's really no other way I can put that. George was before his time. The comrade was so advanced, he foresaw things that the vast majority of us at that time in history did. No other way to cut that pie right there. We just didn't see it coming. And George did. If we study the science of revolutionary social change as articulated by George Lester Jackson, it will provide us a vital tool. It is the tool that we utilize to analyze any body of facts or make up a warfare situation as a whole. And that tool is dialectical materialism or materialist dialectics. It's what allows us to transform the minds and social practice of people who have been orientated to actually assist in their own oppression. It's how we actually decolonize the colonized. Think about this. George stated in a treatise he wrote on legality and illegality that for every system of state and law, and the capitalist system above all, exists in the last analysis because its survival and the validity of its statutes are simply accepted by the colonized. The isolated violations of those statutes does not represent any particular danger to the state, as long as such infringements figure in the general consciousness merely as isolated cases. Dostoevsky has noted in his Siberian Reminiscence how every criminal feels himself to be guilty without necessarily feeling remorse. He understands with perfect clarity that he has broken laws that are no less valid for him than for everyone else. And these laws retain their validity even when personal motives or the force of circumstances have induced him to violate. What did George mean by that? And why is that such significance? George is talking about the idea in people's mind that the power of the state, its authority, is legitimate. How would anyone organize against a thing that they imbue with a degree of legitimacy? We have a word for it. It's called the prestige of power. George actually expounded upon it even further. Before Comrade George met WL or the Black Guerrillas, as I told y'all previously, his mentality could primarily be considered criminal or like a thug. It was only after, and this is his own words, he was redeemed, that he was able to see himself as a victim of social injustice, that he was able to know that his past, quote, criminal acts had been an embryonic form of rebellion, had constituted a tendency, a potential, not actuality, but a potential for undermining the oppressive state's, quote, authority, its prestige, and its legitimacy in his mind and the minds of others. Because once you can achieve that feat, you can overthrow a thing that people don't imbue with prestige. George explained it like this. He said, the prestige of power as a subjective effect of a past deed or reputation, real or fancy, then has a very definite life process. The prestige of the capitalist class in the United States reached its maturity with the close of the 1860 to 1864 Civil War. Since that time, there have been no serious threats to their power. Their excesses have taken on a certain legitimacy through long usage. Prestige bars any serious attack on power. Do people attack a thing they consider with awe, with a sense of its legitimacy? In the process of things, the prestige of power emerges roughly in that period when power does not have to exercise its underlying basis, violence. Having proved and established itself, it drifts, secure from any serious challenge. Its automatic defense attack instincts remain alert. Small threats are either ignored away, laughed away, or in the cases that may build into something dangerous, slapped away. To the masters of capital, the most dreadful omen of all is revolutionary scientific socialism. The grave digger evokes fear response. Prestige wanes if the first attacks on its power base finds it wanting. Prestige dies when it cannot prevent further attacks upon itself. For us to be truly effective, for us to truly transform the nature and structure of capitalist society in 2024, we have to convince a mass of the people to de-link from the processes of their own oppression. We can only do that if we provide them an alternative to link to. There must be some way that people can come together, organize both their labor and their ideas to both meet their needs and build the type of society they want to live in. The solution is the autonomous infrastructure mission. That is the commune. That is what George was articulating as the foundation of any revolutionary scheme. It has to begin there. We organize these programs to appear facially as to be harmless. That wasn't by chance or happenstance. That was by design. We want them to mature to the degree that a significant number of the population employs the aim as their primary basis of social life. So when the pig does come to attack it, not only will they find we're not easy prey, but the broader population will know clearly what they're looking at, which will further isolate the state in the minds of the people. When we seek to defend ourselves and they are found wanting, which they will, their prestige will be diminished. Revolution will again be potentially possible. I don't believe I'm going to see that in my lifetime. But what I do believe is we can build this foundation. The teachings of George Lester Jackson are imperative to our understanding of New African revolutionary nationalism. It's imperative to our application in the worldview of revolutionary scientific socialism. He remains more than significant. He is necessary for each and every one of us to be armed with the tools to change society and thus change the world. Think on these, comrades. These things are cause for great meditation. That's going to be the end of today's political education class. Hope to see y'all again in the future. Brother love.